But we begin tonight with a change in paradigm, a sea change on a huge issue that for decades nobody thought could ever happen. Today, the Justice Department announced a change in American policy, a U-turn on something that had been going the other direction, full speed ahead, for decades, for as long as I have been alive. And now today, it has turned. And this kind of thing has been happening a lot recently, a lot at least during this presidency. During the last presidency, in 2004, when George W. Bush was running for re-election, you might remember that one of the ways the Republicans tried to kind of game the system for that election, particularly in states where they thought things were going to be close, was that they made sure that in those states, Republicans pushed ballot measures for that fall's election that were anti-gay rights. They calculated that anti-gay marriage sentiment was so strong that it would drive conservative voters to the polls in really high numbers, and while those conservative voters were there at the polls to vote against the gay, those voters, of course, could also be reliably counted on to vote for George W. Bush as well. There were 11 anti-gay ballot measures sharing the ballot with George W. Bush that year in 11 states. And the anti-gay side won in every single one of those states. And George W. Bush won as well in 9 of those 11 states. And of course, he won the presidency. In that election, and for years before and after, every single time that marriage rights for same-sex couples got a statewide vote in this country, it lost. More than 30 times, all across the country, every single time there was a statewide vote, it was a loss. It felt like that was just forever, just an intractable, permanent, count-on-it, reliable American prejudice. You could plan other elections around how reliably you could count on gay people being denied equal rights at the polls. And it wasn't just Republicans. Democrats were terrible on the issue as well. The two great legislative legacies of the Democratic president before George W. Bush were Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the Defense of Marriage Act. Yeah, thanks for nothing, Bill Clinton. At the highest levels of American politics, gay rights were toxic, and basically everybody was terrible on the issue, and it just seemed like it was never going to change. That was not that long ago. But now that has very much changed. Not only do equal rights now win when they get statewide votes, but the campaign manager for that Bush re-election effort in 2004, the re-election effort which used that national anti-gay ballot measure strategy, that campaign manager has himself now come out as gay and apologized and is spending his time now working to flip more states into supporting equal rights. Steve Schmidt, who was a key strategist for that exploitatively anti-gay George W. Bush re-election effort in 2004, he now works for the ACLU nationally as a pro-gay marriage Republican organizer. Now, in 2013, Bill Clinton's Defense of Marriage Act is gone. You have to check your watch to see how many states are recognizing equal marriage because the number is increasing seemingly every day. And then today, this afternoon, the Internal Revenue Service just made this announcement, which not long ago would have been abso-freaking-lutely unimaginable. But look what they put out today. Look at this. IRS announces that all legal same-sex marriages will be recognized for federal tax purposes. Ruling provides certainty, benefits, and protections under federal tax law for same-sex couples. Married gay couples can file joint federal tax returns. So says the IRS, officially. Who ever thought this day would come? I mean, I guess if you're 10 years old and you don't remember what it was like to see the President of the United States crowing about how he would make sure gay people were always discriminated against and that's why you should vote for him, maybe if you were 10 years old or younger and you never saw that as a sentient being, then maybe you knew for sure that this day was coming. But otherwise, it is hard to look at this from the IRS today and believe that this is true. But that's true as of today. And you know, it is also true that it felt forever like the prison population in this country was going to keep going up and up and up and up and up forever. Until all of a sudden it started to drop. 3 years in a row now that it has dropped, after something like 30 years of it rising inexorably before that. Same goes for the number of Americans who are uninsured, who don't have health insurance. That number rose intractably year after year, always getting worse, and then even worse still. Until all of a sudden, it started to get better. It turned around once health reform passed. And the number of uninsured people in this country is expected to make its largest drop ever next year once the health exchanges are up and running. Talking Points memo today posted the new ads from a bunch of different states showing how people in various states are about to start learning about the health exchange where they live, where you can go online and choose better, cheaper health insurance than you might have been able to get now. That hasn't even rolled out yet, but we've already turned the corner. We have already turned the corner on something that seemed like it was on a track without corners. In politics, just in our citizenship, there are a handful of what seemed like forever problems. Things that were always getting worse, downward trends that we lived with for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, things that only ever seem to get worse that have now stopped getting worse and are getting better. I'm not talking about things that fluctuate up and down all the time. I'm talking about things that were like this forever and now all of a sudden they've turned. And of course, it's not true of everything. It's not true of a lot of very big things. But it is true of some things. And today we got another one. We got a big one. When Richard Nixon declared the start of the drug war in 1971, it is clear from contemporaneous reporting that he thought he was declaring a war that he could win. He thought that with a sufficient show of federal force and presidential leadership, this whole drugs thing could be kicked. He could win a war on drugs, and everybody would love him for it, and nobody would use drugs anymore. What he was actually doing, though, was signing up not only what was left of his own administration, but every American president to come after him for a constant Sisyphean struggle against something that never got better, something that only was made worse by them fighting it. Jimmy Carter tried to undo some of it in the 1970s, but Reagan ramped it up to a higher pitch than ever when he took over. The 1980s saw all those mandatory minimum sentencing laws passed and the three strikes laws. In 1989, Poppy Bush, George H.W. Bush, re-declared the war on drugs, and the arrest numbers related to pot just shot through the roof. All the policy changes just went in the same direction. More draconian laws, more enforcement, more people arrested, more people in jail, longer sentences. And again, at the highest levels, Democrats were not much help. President Bill Clinton was advised by the U.S. Sentencing Commission that there was no reason for there to be these hugely increased penalties for the crack kind of cocaine as compared to the powdered kind of cocaine. But he rejected that recommendation and decided to keep the draconian sentencing in place for crack. Now, of course, over all of these years and all of these presidents and all of these re-declarations of war, there's been no real effect on American drug use. There's just been a vast expansion of the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system at its least effective and most intrusive. And it has never seemed like it would ever get any better. If you are 40 years old, say, then your life has spanned the drug war. All of your teenage years, your 20s, your 30s have all been about the drug war not only existing, but ramping up and up and up with no end in sight no matter who is in charge. Except now, it is finally changing. At least some of it is changing. That sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and powdered cocaine that President Clinton did not see fit to act on, despite the expert opinion from the Sentencing Commission, President Clinton didn't see fit to act on that, but under President Obama, that change passed through Congress and was signed into law. President Obama signed the bill to fix that disparity with his Attorney General, Eric Holder, looking on as he signed it. Then just 2 weeks ago, Attorney General Eric Holder issued dramatically new directions for federal prosecutors, telling them essentially to stop charging people for most drug offenses in a way that would trigger those mandatory minimum sentences. A huge reversal. That's a huge reversal after 30 years of the laws and the guidelines always clamping down in the opposite direction. And then today, the biggest change yet. In November, Colorado and Washington State both passed ballot measures legalizing pot in small quantities for recreational use. Lots of states have legalized the use of marijuana for medical purposes, but in the last few years, more than a dozen states have done that. But in Colorado and Washington, voters said the police should not care why you are using pot. If you are using pot to get intoxicated, you're using it to get high, that should not be illegal in small amounts for personal use. Pot should instead just be regulated in much the same way that alcohol is. And that is fine as far as state law goes. It was a pretty definitive vote in both Colorado and Washington state. What was awkward, though, and what was legally confrontational about those changes in those two states, is that even if Colorado and Washington wanted pot to be legal under state law, marijuana is still a controlled substance, illegal under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. See, it's right there. Number 10, spelled with an H, marijuana. Before mescaline and after LSD. That is federal law. How can something be legal in 2 American states, but illegal in America? How can something be legal in 2 states but illegal in the whole country? Is the federal government going to let Colorado and Washington do this? The Attorney General for the state of Washington had said recently that he was girding for the federal government to sue him, to sue the state of Washington and the state of Colorado as well, presumably, to overturn those state laws legalizing pot, thus rendering pot illegal nationwide, full stop. That is pretty much what everybody was expecting. Well, today, the Justice Department said they are not going to do that. In a letter to all federal prosecutors, the Attorney General's office says that Colorado and Washington effectively can move ahead with decriminalizing pot for personal use in those states. The Justice Department says that states need to abide by some law enforcement priorities in terms of the way they regulate pot, things like keeping it away from kids and preventing interstate traffic and preventing drugged driving and some other stuff. But the headline here is that Colorado and Washington can go ahead and legalize pot for personal recreational use with the federal government's blessing. There will be no federal challenge to pot legalization in 2 states. This is a big deal in one day's news. But in the context of a lifetime's worth of the futile, ever more aggressive war on drugs, what the administration just did today feels unimaginable. It feels like cats chasing dogs. It feels like pigs flying. It feels like the Harlem Globetrotters losing. And it happened. It's done. Adjust your expectations for what is within the realm of the possible in our country.